Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is Red Stick Mirage. So in this classic episode, we're going to talk about the two different type of melanated people that we have in North America. One is favorable and could be your friend, and the other one is malefic and can be your enemy, but they both look the same. So we want to use this classic episode to think deeply and be able to learn how to see the gray area, see the nuanced details in life, to be able to test the heart and the spirit of a person. Because although we may be coming into information about who we are and, the different family ties that we may have, but as the old saying goes, all skin folk are not kinfolk. And that actually reminds me of an old Dr. Dre song that came out on his album, The Chronic 2001. But he had a song called The Difference Between Me and You. As I was sitting here thinking, getting ready to do the tape, that song popped out of my subconscious. The Difference Between Me and You, that old Dr. Dre song. And I think it was featuring Eminem and Exhibit, if I'm remembering correctly. But Dr. Dre certainly had that song, and that's just the perfect, moral of the story or theme to this video. But we don't want to get caught up in just the fact that somebody may be a melanated American. We have to test the heart and the spirit of this person. We must test the heart and the spirit of ourselves. And, we want to know who's who. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Luciferian Freemasons, the story of Jacob and Esau, the Creek Civil War of the early 1800s. And we're also going to talk about the Red Sticks versus the Tabernacle of Edom. All right. So that's what the theme of this video is going to be. The difference between me and you. The difference between what they would call the sellout person and the person who can stand tall and stand on principle. All right. So that's what we're dealing with right here now. We're dealing with, the so-called Black American person who is an upstanding person. They have integrity, they have loyalty, and they can be trusted. And then you have the person that may be the sellout, the Judas, the traitor, the person that'll stab you in the back and put the noose around your neck when you thought it was your friend. So we have to have the spiritual insight and intuition and the eye to know who is who. So in these, troubling times, we will associate and affiliate ourselves with the right people. All right. So that is the introduction of the prelude, and just something I want you to think about a little bit before we go into this video. So I will be using a great comment that was left in the last video, and I want to salute and thank the brother for leaving us a great comment. Had a lot of powerful information, and it actually goes hand in hand with what I want to read out of my own book so we could make our point. All right. So what we're going to do is go through the comment. We're going to analyze this, and see what we can gain from this and see what we can learn. So I'm going to read this brother's comment, and we will do our examination. It says all mass shootings are hoaxes perpetrated by the deep state of Freemasonry as justification to flood the community with dossiers of target individuals whom may be whistleblowers, light workers, and those they want to discredit and suppress. You are right. The timing with the full moon is witchcraft. Yet I researched the news for the name of the white supremacist shooter and read a report that said the authorities were not releasing the name of the suspect nor victims. That means it didn't even happen. And that is how the deep state falsifies incident to lay justification for targeting innocent people, especially since school is returning, both public and private, which means they can dossier their targets to a vast number of people. The whole community around put on alert about their identity. The Illuminati Freemasonry divided the people by having some spy on and watch others while no one is watching them. The deep state uses mass shootings, cases of public officials and celebrities caught in rape and pedophilia scandals as perfect timing to dossier targeted individuals. Now, in the last video, we briefly mentioned this, quote unquote situation in Florida where there was this quote unquote racist shooter and he killed 3 people allegedly. And I mentioned that when you have these events, for one, you have to look at sometimes astrologically what's going on, and more so what's going on with the celestial bodies, in particular the moon, because the moon goes from the dark phase or the new moon to the fully illuminated full moon at the end of the month. And when you look at the timing of, the lunar cycle, when I saw the timing of the March on Washington's 60th anniversary, and then you had this shooting happen, and this is all during this week. All right. So you had these 3 major things going on at one time: the full moon, the so-called March on Washington 60th anniversary, and this shooting. Something seemed a little inorganic about that, to say the least. So whenever I see something that's inorganic on the TV and the media and the propaganda, the news cycle, and it's being, pushed everywhere, that immediately makes me think of, mind control programming, behavioral modification programming, and also certain, deep state psychological warfare to prime the people's consciousness to make certain types of decisions and choices that will benefit them in the end. And also for them to use these, falsified events as almost like a smokescreen or a flash bomb to blind the people and distract the people while they go and attack their targets that they know may be a real threat to them. All right. So, a lot of what this brother is hitting on in this comment is very on point, and it's exact to a lot of the things I was thinking. We also want to remember that the Freemasons, the Shriners, those behind the closed doors, the Canaanite Babylonian wizards and warlocks, the Hollywood production, what they broadcast on TV and media, the movies, this is a form of black magic through the black mirror, and is used to really gain influence over the consciousness of the people so they'll make certain choices and decisions. So, like, for example, when I saw on CNN, they were talking a little bit about the shooting, and they had, in real big letters on front of the screen, racist shooter hates black people, or something along the lines of that. He was a self-proclaimed so-called hater of black people. And what that does is if you're not careful and you're not using your higher mind, that can trigger so-called black people emotionally. And what this will do is it'll either put you in a fear state or it can make you over aggressive. All right. If you're over aggressive, what that can do is, all of a sudden now you're thinking maybe everybody's your enemy. All right. So you have too much, you putting too much attention and energy in the wrong area. And then if you're fearful, you basically paralyzed, you don't know who to trust. So none of those states of consciousness are good, whether you're being over aggressive or you're being fearful. So, that's something that so-called black Americans need to look out for when they have these types of events. And when this information comes out, you don't want to go with your first emotion. You want to sit back. You may have a couple of thoughts on what you think it may be. Could this be a mind control programming CIA operative? Could this be an organic event where this may have really been just some, so-called racist guy who went and really had created a real shooting? Either way it goes, you should pause and sit back and really analyze everything. Now, the brother also says here that, let me find this part. He says, yet I searched the news for the name of the white supremacist shooter and read a report that said the authorities were not releasing the name of the suspect nor the victims. So this is something else that, once again, certain details that we zoom in on and question, and ponder and contemplate on it, because once again, I'm just not reading this. So I didn't even know that myself, for example. So, once again, these tricks, these deceptions that they put out, and really a lot of it is to suck a lot of energy out of the people and to put you in a fear state, basically. And also for them to target certain people, because I do like how the brother commented on that multiple times. And that is something that they like to do. So that's a good part of the first part. Now let's go to the second. All right, we're going to read from the top down. As far as race being a gang or a team, I respectfully disagree on the grounds that we are fighting Satanism. The Freemasonry Illuminati includes men and women of all races, all religious and cultural backgrounds. There is no black and white in this war against evil. There are literally those who serve Lucifer, and they are demon possessed. The Stewart County is named after a steward that fought against your Mississippi Valley ancestors and is credited taking your lands. These stewards are Edomites, very fair-skinned or reddish-brown, the actual color of Hebrews. These Hebrews mixed with the indigenous people and became the modern Boule Freemasons, free blacks, that control the Prince Hall Freemasonry. Your grandfather Army was probably an Israelite, and he was probably fair-skinned to reddish-brown as well. Our ancestors that came from Europe were the Hebrews of Edom and Israel, and they look similar to Ishmael, the Arabs, who are fair-skinned to reddish-brown, except woolly-haired Edom is not the white Jews who really are Khazars, part of Japheth. Edom worships the gods of Egypt, which is satanic Luciferian worship, and mask themselves under Christianity and Islam. Free blacks held more slaves in some southern Confederate states as the white Jews. The two were the only slave owners. Each degree of Freemasonry Illuminati is the worship of a different deity of Egypt. That's why we are under the modern day Egypt. We live in a very evil age, my brother. Much love to you. Stay putting out the knowledge. All right. So that's another great part of the comment. And we're going to use this to gain some knowledge and insight and go through what the brother was elaborating on. So from the top down, it says that as far as race being a gang or a team, I respectfully disagree on the grounds that we are fighting against Freemasonry. The Freemasonry Illuminati includes men and women of all races, all religious and cultural backgrounds. There is no black and white in this war against evil. They are literally those who serve Lucifer, and they are demon possessed. This is all facts. Ain't no fiction about it. All right. As I was saying before, like the people that's on your side, the people that's on your team are those that, you're going to have people of our own nation and ethnicity that have a good heart and a good mind and a good spirit, and they want to do the right thing, and they're going to fight for a righteous cause. But you also going to have foreigners who may not be from our ethnicity and nation, but maybe they'll have the right type of mindset, heart, and spirit and good intention, and they'll fight for the right cause. So the brother is right. You of course, you can't get caught up in how someone's physical appearance is to think that that's someone that's on your team. And it was another part. Hold on real quick. Oh, right. And then, like he said, how the Freemasonry Illuminati includes men and women of all races, religious and cultural backgrounds. That's facts. We talking about a massive network and a, massive organization of people from all different backgrounds that are all under one agenda, believe it or not. Okay, so that's facts. And there are those that serve Lucifer, and they are demon possessed. This is facts as well. Okay, this is facts as well. These people, basically have given themselves over to a malefic agenda. Their carnal nature and lower self, their base nature, the certain lower predatory reptilian carnal instincts that they have, and they're very grounded and fixed to the material world. So those who think in that manner and those who operate and behave in that manner, they operate under what is known as the Luciferic or the Luciferian doctrine, which is one who is exalted in the ego. And through that false self, they exalt themselves over all creation. Okay. Now, let me also throw this in there too, because this may not be the case for all Satanists and Luciferians, but for a lot of them it is. You have certain Satanists and Luciferians that may not necessarily associate or identify themselves with a malefic spiritual energy or being, that may be called quote unquote Lucifer or Satan, but then you have those that do. So it's not really about if so-called Satan or Lucifer is real. What is real is that human beings can have a negative, malefic agenda and objective. Human beings can have a negative, antagonistic, toxic energy and spirit. And there also is antagonistic, toxic spiritual forces, I'll say, that cannot be seen. And all of those different, individuals that I just named, they can be in concert with each other. And, however you see that happening, that's on you individually. But we don't want to discount that. Yes, you know what I'm saying? There is Satanism and Luciferianism behind all of this. All right. That's the fact. The Stewart County is named after a steward that fought against your Mississippi Valley ancestors and is credited for taking the land. These stewards are Edomites, very fair-skinned to reddish brown, the actual color of Hebrews. These Hebrews mixed with the indigenous people and became the modern Boule free blacks that controlled the Prince Hall Freemasonry. Now, right here is where the brother elaborated on something that's very good that is going to take us to even what I'm going to read. And that's understanding that there are, we all may be melanated people and we may look the same, but some of us come from different ethnic groups. And some of these ethnic groups that we come from, there may be, generational warfare between different tribes. All right. And in order to understand this human event and human phenomenon, the Bible gives us the story of Jacob and Esau. All right. Now, Jacob and Esau they're the sons of Isaac. OK. And Jacob and Esau were brothers. All right. Now, you have a lot of false doctrines that have been put out here, more than likely by Freemason, Illuminati, secret influence to control and confuse these people. But you got these so-called black Hebrew Israelites, and some of them have this doctrine of quote unquote Esau being a Caucasian or what they call the phenotypical white man. And they'll show these pictures of, Esau as this so-called white baby and Jacob as this so-called melanated black baby. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not true. OK, Esau was a ruddy man. All right. In the scripture, and he would have favored, original people. Now, did he possess possibly, some recessive traits? Maybe. But I'm not under the belief, and I don't follow that, quote unquote doctrine, because that's a doctrine. As far as a lot of the actual empirical evidence and, data that I've read from books and certain literature and really, the main original sources in the Bible, I'm not coming to the conclusion, that Esau was no Caucasian man. So you all don't fall for that. And also, too, the brother clearly tells us right here, he says, our ancestors that came from Europe were the Hebrews of Edom and Israel. Now, let me say this real quick. If you read in the Bible, it clearly will tell you in the New Testament that a lot of the Edomites that were living in the land of Judah, and some of them were married into what's known as the Roman Empire. OK, so you had Edomite families that were married to so-called Romans. And during this time period, some of these Edomites were practicing the Shemitic Judaic religion or culture, but they were from the tribe of Edom or the Tabernacle of Edom. And Edom and Israel always were enemies. OK, so I want you to get this in your mind. You had two melanated, let's say, families, and both of them were, had a Shemitic culture. But one of them actually adopted the culture of their relative, which were the Edomites, adopting a lot of the Judaic culture. But they also had beef and problems and conflicts with the original Judaic people. All right. So you have some people that's using the Israelite culture and they are antagonistic. And then you have the original people of that culture. All right. So this is also, talked about in the Bible in the New Testament, where you see the association with Rome and Edom and some of the Edomites adopting the Judaic faith or the Judaic culture. All right. So when this brother says right here that our ancestors that came from Europe were the Hebrews of Edom and Israel, You got to remember that Hebrew or Eber was an ancestor of both Esau and Jacob. He was an ancestor of Isaac. He was an ancestor of Abraham. Eber or Hebrew, he was one of the sons of Shem, one of the descendants of Shem. And Hebrew or Eber lived before Esau and Jacob did. Okay. Now, that's why, you'll hear those brothers maybe calling themselves Hebrew Israelites, because they're trying to show you there's a difference between the line of Esau and the line of Jacob. All right. Although they both come through Abraham, and they both come through Shem, and they both come through Eber. All right. So you have these people that, just kind of keep up with what we're saying, that they may have a Hebraic Edomite culture. Okay. And this brother elaborates on that very, very well. He says that our ancestors that came from Europe were the Hebrews of Edom and Israel. These were the melanated Europeans that came and married into a lot of these Aboriginal families. And they look similar to Ishmael, the Arabs, who are fair-skinned to reddish brown, except woolly-haired. Remember, Ishmael is the brother of Isaac, the sons of Abraham. Okay? And the mothers of Ishmael and Isaac are Sarah and Hagar. Both Sarah and Hagar were melanated Aboriginal women. And Abraham was a melanated Aboriginal man. So that meant that Isaac and Ishmael were melanated Aboriginal men. All right. We're talking about the original ones. Did some of these lines get bleached out? Yes, they did. But the original ones, no, these were a dark copper colored, melanated original people. All right. Now, the reason why this is important, because, like we said, all skin folk and kinfolk. What's the difference between me and you? Just because we got, melanin or maybe a copper colored skin tone, you may not come from the same tribe I did. We may have come from, let's say, an ancient tribes that were always beefing with each other. And this historical account of the Edomites versus the Israelites or the Jacobites, that's ultimately what that's trying to show us. And this continued on into the Americas. All right. So I want to just go through this sentence again, because once again, when we go through this information, it's not about us, thinking that, OK, I already know this. Some of the people listening to the tape, this may be their first time coming across this information. So, if it's something that I should elaborate on a little bit more, we're just going to take our time to do that. We ain't in no rush. So he says that our ancestors that came from Europe were the Hebrews of Edom and Israel, and they look similar to Ishmael, the Arabs, who are fair-skinned or reddish brown, except woolly-haired. Edom is not the white Jews, who really are Khazars, part of Japheth. Now, this is something that's, important that we've talked about before. All right. How, these Caucasian so-called Jewish people, really are claiming a line through Ashkenaz and Japheth. All right. They're not really claiming the Shemitic line. So they have people fooled. So just like how, they have that false term of being an African American, and how you can't be a person from both continents. Like, you got to come from one continent, right? Well, that's the same with what the Caucasian so-called Jew of today is doing. You can't call yourself an Ashkenazi Jew, because Ashkenaz comes from the line of Japheth, and Judah, or the Judeans, come from the line of Shem. And Shem and Japheth were brothers. So you can't come from both lines. It got to be one or the other. So, maybe that was the rabbis of their, community putting in the truth with the lie. So they can say that, well, we told our people, but they, maybe they didn't accept it, or maybe they do their research. So they calling themselves Ashkenazi Jews. It's like calling yourself an African American. You can't be both, because Ashkenazi does not come from the line of Shem. He comes from the line of Japheth. Okay. So that's why I say that these Caucasian Jewish people, some of these Caucasian Christians, these people are working under the banner of the evil melanated Edomites who bleached in and married in with them. And also it was another one I was going to say. Ashkenaz and Japheth. So this is why I always say that, they come from that line of Japheth, Rome, You know what I'm saying? Like they come from over there on that line, basically. All right. So another part he said, oh, here we go, my bad. And he says that Edom worships the gods of Egypt, which is satanic Luciferianism, or excuse me, Luciferian worship, and mask themselves under Christianity and Islam. And of course, that's what they do. You know, in the public, they may act like they, you know, these Christian Shriners. Like you'll see these Caucasian Christian men during Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they on commercials at hospitals, and you know they got their Shriner hats on, and they talking about all these, you know, Christian principles when they up there with, you know, diseased kids and kids that have sicknesses and acting like they these philanthropic men of the people. But really behind closed doors, they doing, you know, Canaanite Baal worship, you know, Bacchus rituals, Bacchus blood drinking festivals, etc. You know, so that's the black and white checkerboard that they play on in Freemasonry behind closed doors. And he says that each degree of Freemasonry, Illuminati, is the worship of a different deity of Egypt. That's why we are under the modern day Egypt, and he is correct. So we are under the black magic of the Egyptians, just like how in the Old Testament story, once again, the Old Testament story is trying to give you an understanding of not only a certain, you know, a historical phenomenon, I'll say, that has happened in the ancient world and is happening in the modern world. So I'm not necessarily saying that, you know, once again, like some people take the Bible stories and, you know, because you can't quote unquote prove it, you think that, oh, this isn't real. It's these are stories. They're trying to give you, you know, certain principles and certain points, you know what I'm saying? Certain guidance and certain instruction to certain human phenomenon, you know, and certain human experience. All right. So the whole human phenomenon and human experience of people that were part of our ancestry living under a powerful civilization where its rulership used what we'll call malefic black magic, that has happened before. It's happened a lot. So just like how it's happening today, it's happened before that. All right. So when he talks, so now we understand who these so-called, you know, Boule people are. You know, they these Edomites, these, you know, melanated people from Europa who have amalgamated themselves into these families over here. And also the Caucasian Slavs, they came under them and they came with them. All right. So as we say, all skinfolk and kinfolk. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to read about the Creek Civil War, which is basically another Jacob versus Esau story, except this happened in real life and this is real history. All right. The Creek Civil War happened around 1816, 1817, the early 1800s. And it was, you know, we're going to just read it right here because we're going to go through the history, you know, and we'll analyze what we have to, because a lot of the points that the brother made in his comment, you will see this show up again in the Creek War. In the early 1800s, a Hebrew prophet named Tecumseh prays for a dominant confederacy of united tribes of North America. Tecumseh's parents were Muskogee and Shawnee, and he was born in the Midwest Ohio area. He grew up seeing his father and other men warring with palefaces that burned down his childhood homes. Tecumseh began piracy along the rivers, making it unsafe for Europeans traveling the water highways. Around 1805, Tecumseh's younger brother, let me see how you pronounce his name, Tenskwatawa, the Shawnee prophet, began prophesying about end-time events that would destroy the Europeans and urging autochthonous Hebrews to get right with the Great Spirit. He burned Christian Bibles and clothes, preached about abandoning white culture, and wanted a return to the commandments of ancient ancestors. Many downtrodden, low-spirited Americans were rejuvenated by his divine power and chose to follow him and Tecumseh. Tenskwatawa accused chiefs who gave Europeans land of treason, telling the false leaders their land contracts were null and void. The prophet and Tecumseh were showing much needed resistance to alien invaders of the United States. So what you have in the early 1800s, there was an Aboriginal man named Tecumseh, all right, a melanated man, Aboriginal to the Americas. He was a Muskogee Mississippian, okay, and during the War of 1812, around that time, he was starting to have issues with the United States infiltrating on a lot of, their ancestral lands. So it started to be these conflicts. And him and his brother, what they did is they started to communicate and, rally up a lot of the men in that area. And they created a confederacy to battle against this and go against this. All right. So you start to get some of the, Aboriginal people coming together to go against this invasion happening around the time of the War of 1812. Now, these foreigners that are invading, these Europeans, they are, they're the ones that they really want with are a lot of these melanated Edomites and some of the Caucasian Slavs or serfs that's coming with them. All right. Because remember, we may use that catch-all term European, but as the brother said in the comment, the people that came from Europe were from the house of Edom and they were from the house of Israel, but they were both European and they were both melanated and they were of various skin tones. So keep that in mind as well. All right. So we go on. Around 1808, Tecumseh and the American Hebrews built a city called Prophetstown in modern-day Indiana. The divine national movement of the Prophet and Tecumseh evolved into a multi-tribal confederacy of autochthonous Americans sharing an Israelite type of spirituality. In 1809, the Treaty of Fort Wayne was signed by Indiana Governor William Henry Harris and sellout tribal leaders, which put American lands of Illinois and Indiana under U.S. jurisdiction. In the fall of 1810, Tecumseh led an army of Moorish or Meru warriors to meet with Harris about the illegal land cession. Arguments erupt, leaving Tecumseh no choice but to prepare for war. Along with Hebrew prophets, Tecumseh goes down south to raise awareness and support, knowing tribes in this region are suffering from the same European crimes. So what happened was Tecumseh and a lot of the brothers in the Midwest, around 1808, 1809, the Treaty of Fort Wayne was signed by the Indiana governor and some of these sellout Aboriginal Americans who were working with these dirty Luciferian Edomites of the early 1800s. So making these backdoor deals, basically, okay? And Tecumseh and the rest of the men are saying, hey, well, we all didn't agree to that, all right? So these guys were basically selling the people out and selling the land out just so they could come up. And then they were following, not necessarily following, but yet following and believing the lies of these Europeans, okay? So Tecumseh and his men said, nah, we're going to go against this. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into the indigenous South, go into the deep South, and hook up with the Mississippians in the South and influence them to go to war with us, because we know that they down there dealing with the same thing in modern day Georgia, in modern day Alabama, in modern day Carolinas, etc. All right. So it says that in the Southeast, thousands of American Creeks and Seminoles gather around to hear the great speeches from Tecumseh. Also, that term Seminoles, all right, the Seminoles are just a mixture of the Yamasee, the Hitchiti, certain Creek warriors who went into Florida and mixed with some of the Aboriginal people there, but they were all still, indigenous Americans. So, the term Seminole and Creek, these really are the same people. All right. So going on, it says in the Southeast, thousands of American Creeks and Seminoles gathered around to hear the great speeches from Tecumseh, which inspired the people to retain traditional customs and to never let up on pale faces. Accompanying Tecumseh were war prophets from the Midwest who tended to the spiritual emptiness in the hearts of Southerners. Creeks and Seminoles took on the faith of Tecumseh, feeling they should do something about Europeans destroying American lives. The prophets of Tecumseh told the people that the Great Spirit was going to send a sign to assure their confidence in defeating enemies. U.S. politicians were preparing to move into Southern territories and remove Americans from their tribal lands. In 1811, Creeks and Seminoles witnessed a sparkling shooting star flying in the skies, just a few months after Tecumseh's departure. This was taken as a sign from the Great Spirit to face the European and to not have an ounce of fear while doing so. Conservative members of the Upper Creeks created a faction called the Red Sticks. It would be a terrifying force representing the divine national American movement of Tecumseh. So I remember I told you around 1809, after that Fort Wayne Treaty was signed, Tecumseh was pissed. And he was like, nah, you know what? We about to go to war with these people. Like, really ain't no more talking. We're going to have to pipe up, but we're going to go ahead and get all, the soldiers and warriors together. So let's go into the South and get them on our side. So Tecumseh goes into the South. And when he goes into the South, he comes across, the Cherokee, the Anahuia, the Tusalagi, some of the Alabamians. He comes across the Creeks. So, he's telling them, like, look, y'all, we all going through the same stuff pretty much. They kidnapping our people. They putting them into enforced servitude. They destroying our crops. They killing our the animals, etc. They trying to steal the land. So we all need to go to war with them. And a lot of the Aboriginals in the South said, you know what, Tecumseh, you're correct. Now, remember, these are all Aboriginal people of the South. All right. Aboriginal people of America, trying to create a confederacy to go against this European invasion. All right. And Tecumseh is leading this. So he comes into the South, and around 1811, the Creeks and the Seminoles, they witness a shooting star, basically. All right. And according to the history, they took this as a sign from the Great Spirit that was kind of confirming what Tecumseh was telling them, saying, hey, we need to get ready to go to war with these people. Now, when I say the Great Spirit, I mean, the Lord Almighty, God Almighty. The so-called Aboriginal American, did believe in a higher power. All right. So you have various types of faiths, or we'll say spirituality. But you did have Aboriginal people that were from the Mississippian culture, and various cultures, really, of North America, the Eastern Seaboard, that did believe in a great spirit. All right. What we may call so-called God. Okay. So once these men consolidated, in this confederacy that was created, this is what they call the Red Sticks. So now we're going to go to page 162. All right. Remember the difference between me and you. The difference between Jacob and Esau. Remember that. A difference between the upper Red Stick Creeks and Lower Creeks was the bed stenching of Lower Creek women and all the mixed English children in their territories. Now, when I'm saying mixed English children, remember, majority of these were melanated Edomites, but they also had some of these Caucasian Slavs with them. And when they were starting to come into the South and bleach themselves into certain families, you had certain American families that didn't want to deal with them. Okay. So it wasn't like every Aboriginal tribe was intermarrying and trying to really work with these Europeans and live with them. Some Aboriginal people was like, yeah, we'll do business with you, but we're not trying to take on your culture. We're not trying to take on your religion. We're not trying to take on your foods. We ain't trying to assimilate with you like that. We'll just do business, but you stay over there and do your thing, and we're going to stay over here. Not every American thought like that. The ones that wanted to maybe just do business, but still keep and retain their own traditional land, their own traditional customs, those was the people like Tecumseh and the Red Sticks. But then you had these other Aboriginals that wanted to, practice Christianity, and, they may have not minded intermarrying with some of these Caucasian Slavs and serfs of the Edomites coming from Europe. And these were, the people that started to be a rift. So now you having these melanated indigenous Americans, they both tribal Americans, but because they having these different relationships with how they interact with the European, that's starting to cause a division within the people. All right. So it says that, and also let me say this too. Even during this time period, any Caucasian so-called, Jewish person, or any Caucasian so-called Christian that was in the South, and they had maybe any kind of, plantation ownership or any kind of status or any kind of business, please believe that on the highest level through the Freemasonry, there was some melanated Edomite satanic family that was sponsoring and financing them. All right. So during this time period, these Caucasian people, it wasn't like they was moving and shaking on their own. All right. And remember this, too. There were Edomite families that were outwardly, maybe expressing themselves as being Jewish. All right. But they were melanated. But these were evil people. OK, so keep that in mind. Remember, on one of my prior tapes, I talked about the satanic rabbis. That's who We still talking about the descendant of those people. Okay. So you did have, if it, like I say, if it was any pale Caucasian male that had any kind of power, he was a freed and accepted Mason that was let out of serfdom by some melanated, European. And slowly they raised him up. They taught him how to eat, how to carry himself, how to go to war, etc. And they gave him a little bit of property. And then they would send him to go against other Aboriginal tribes and Aboriginal people. Okay. So it says that these Englishmen were welcomed by Lord Creeks, who traded with them and were willing to become indoctrinated with Christian culture. This created a wedge with Red Sticks, who were noticing a buffer class of amalgamated Creeks growing in front of them, who were more inclined to live with their Slavic white fathers. Lord Creeks were spiritually defeated and were among many tribes who rejected Tecumseh's offer and wanted to kick him out of the South for stirring up trouble. The full-blooded Southern Creek males were metaphorically castrated, having to dwell in communities where pale males had access to their women. This would be a repeated problem in tribes where females had leadership and weak males. Southern Creeks found themselves defending mixed families members from Red Stick invasions. While the United States fought the War of 1812 versus Britain, they also dispatched resources to mixed Creeks, combating the Red Stick Upper Creeks from Georgia and Alabama. All right. In 1812-1813, the Creek Civil War started from the Red Sticks having enough of Lower Creek females opening the door for European devils. The Mulatto Creek sons of aristocratic Englishmen, like William McIntosh, were double agents and served as a military strategy for the United States. Mixed Creeks grew up in a matriarchal system, so their English fathers never had to be present. They learned Creek languages and heritages, spending most of their time mimicking the behavior of full-blooded Creek men, all the while feeling left out by not being fully Moorish and resenting their amalgamated nature. They usually manifested as disgust for their dark-skinned mothers. From this white English lineage, William McIntosh, the Mixed Creek, was placed in a position of authority over Creeks by Englishmen of Savannah, Georgia. As he grew older, McIntosh gained riches by enslaving denationalized Moors and opening corporations like his contemporaries. Mixed sons of influential Englishmen, both melanated Edomite and maybe Slavic Caucasians who were freed through Freemasonry, were associated with each other and became de facto leaders for the entire Creek nation. So what was starting to happen is that when you had these melanated Edomites from Europa starting to come into North America, and then you had their pale Slavic serfs that they, freed and raised up through the Freemasonry system. Majority of these Europeans, more especially the melanated ones, they were marrying a lot of the Aboriginal women of the South. But because the, families of those women were matriarchal, the children were learning a lot of the Aboriginal ways, but they still had those European fathers. So it would be like having, like today, you all would call them, I guess, like that so-called mulatto or that mixed person that would be confused. Like, what's that woman name on ESPN? Damn it, what's that broad's name? Because she has a melanated father, and I think she has a Caucasian Jewish mother. What is that broad's name? I can't remember it right now. But y'all know who I'm talking about, though. One of them damn bedwench broadcasters on ESPN. Malika Andrews, that's what it is. Malika Andrews. That's her last name. And it's funny because I've seen one of the Moorish crest of one of the Moorish Scottish crest of arms, coat of arms rather, excuse me. I saw the name Andrews on it, and it was a melanated woman. So more than likely she could be, mixed in from this Caucasian Slavic mother and one of the melanated people from Europa who could have been from the line of Israel or Edom. But nevertheless, that's her lineage, and she has a self-hatred issue. Yes, it's the woman named Malika Andrews. So like what they call that that tortured mulatto. All right. So it says the Red Stick war prophets hacked the necks of traitorous Indian chiefs who did not support revolts versus Lower Creeks and Englishmen, holding up several heads to cheering war bands of Red Stick Muslims. In the summer of 1813, the American Civil War launches as Red Stick Muslims incinerate Creek towns who dealt with Christian Europeans. A few months later, Mixed McIntosh and his police force retaliate in Georgia against Red Sticks of the war prophets. Spanish monarchs were doing business with Red Sticks by providing firearms, and when U.S. colonials and colonels, were informed of this, a group of white militia was sent out to ambush them. At the Battle of Burnt Corn, U.S. troops entered the Creek Civil War with a first duel with Red Stick Muslims. Many of the amalgamated Creeks took refuge at Fort Mims, Alabama. So what happened was that after Tecumseh, got the brothers turned up in the South, and it was like, okay, the Red Sticks was like, we ready to go to war. So what the Red Sticks were doing was certain connects that they had with the Britons, the melanated Britons of Israel, and some of the connects that they had with some of the people in so-called Spanish Florida, or really Iberian, Moroccan, Moorish Florida. They would go and hook up with them and get firearms. So this is why you see, that Seminole influence. Like when you look at the Seminole Indians or some of the Creek Indians, they'll tell you that they had Muslims or, people in their war party who understood Islam. All right. But they were aboriginal to the Americas. All right. Remember, like I told you all in one of the prior tapes, these stories in the Bible and the stories in the Quran, some of the ancestral archetypal figures in the book, these were stories that we created to explain, certain human phenomenon, certain aspects of chronological human events. But in other words, we are the real people. We created the stories. Okay. So it's not about, is Abraham a real person, or is Jacob a real person, or is Esau a real person? That has nothing to do with it. We are the real people. Okay? We are the real people. So where we at? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, the Red Sticks was going into Florida. So you had a lot of the, the Moorish Muslims that were from the Iberian Peninsula that was still in Florida. They were hooking up with a lot of the Aboriginal people of the South, giving them weapons and help fighting against, these Christian Slavs that ran off of those plantations of King George. Some of these, melanated Edomites who were trying to fight and steal the Iroquois, Aboriginal American government and destroy the Mississippian government so they could create something brand new for themselves, and their Caucasian Slavic children. And this is what the problem was. So while some of the Red Sticks were coming back from Florida with some weapons, they were actually ambushed and got into a fight with some of the Caucasian Slavs and some of the other, associates of the so-called United States. Okay. And they also got into it with some of the Creeks who were associated with them and married into their families. So this is that Civil War aspect where you have Red Stick Creeks going against Creeks that were, affiliated with Christian Europe, I'll say. Remember now, there's a difference between satanic, fake, Judaic, Edomite Europe and what we'll say is real Shemitic culture coming from Europe. There's a difference. All right. There's a difference. So usually when I'm saying, Roman Christian, I'm talking about, the Tabernacle of Edom. But if you hear me use that term Israelite in its original context, I'm talking about, the people through the line of Hebrew that goes through, of Hebrew, Eber, that goes through Isaac, that goes through Jacob, Israel, and goes down to his 12 sons. All right. So next, what we're going to talk about is should I go into this? Yeah, I will. Why not? During the fall of 1813, Red Stick Muslims attacked the Fort Mims stockade. Fort Mims is in Alabama. So it says, during the fall of 1813, Red Stick Muslims attacked Fort Mims stockade, wearing traditional red and black war paint. White militiamen were beaten and impaled as screams of fright exit the mouths of pale women. Under the afternoon sun, red stick tomahawks give the judgments rendered by the comet and New Madrid earthquake of Tecumseh. Negro bed stenches are put to death by having their heads bashed into tree stumps. Innocent white settlers die as well, leaving no remains of the Fort Mims settlement. Hundreds are massacred this August evening, and as proof of victory, war bands shave the scalps of pale skulls. In the northern woodlands, Tecumseh's warriors combated U.S. troops, sending shockwaves of extreme panic to white settlers of the South. For the following months, Red Stick Muslims relentlessly interrupted peace and fought hard to save their homelands from being taken away. So in the Battle of Fort Mims, what you had was, the Red Sticks, they turned up. And what they did was they attacked this fort that some of the United States, people created, and their families were there. And also you had these Creeks who were sellouts that were living with them and that had intermarried into their families. So basically the Red Sticks, they ambushed that place, they burned it down, and they slaughtered those people. All right. And that's historically known as the Battle of Fort Mims. All right. The Battle of Fort Mims. And that was in Alabama. Okay. Happened in 1813. This is part of the Creek War. It says Southern territories under U.S. occupation began rounding up militiamen from various states of the Southeast to stop Red Stick American Creeks. William McIntosh and other mixed Indians joined the U.S. under Colonel Andrew Jackson, the man on the $20 bill. And before we move forward, I've personally seen a picture of Andrew Jackson where it said that he was a melanated Scot. It said he was a melanated Scot. So he possibly could have come from the house of Edom or the Tabernacle of Edom. But he was a melanated Scot. So yes, Andrew Jackson, the man on the $20 bill, more than likely was not a Caucasian man. He was more than likely a melanated Edomite from the house of Edom. Okay. And he is who led the United States Army into the South against the Red Sticks. So it says that, so William McIntosh, remember those mulatto mixed Creeks? So those mixed Creeks, they joined the United States under Andrew Jackson. So this is also part of the Civil War against the Red Sticks. All right. So it says that spiritually conquered tribes such as Northern Cherokee joined the war versus the Red Sticks, strengthening United States defense and possibilities of finally stealing their land. Part of southern Georgia and central Alabama was still under Red Stick control, and in the spring of 1814, Jackson's militia and sellout Indians began blasting cannons in the early morning. Outnumbered, American Red Sticks fight to the death, eventually being overwhelmed by United States soldiers. Many Red Sticks were killed, but the remaining survivors retreat to Seminole Everglades of Florida / South Georgia. Down but not defeated, the Red Stick Moorish Americans would regroup and plan for a future attack. So Andrew Jackson and some of his cavalry, in the spring of 1814, they actually caught some of the Red Sticks, in a vulnerable position. And a lot of the Red Sticks were killed, and the ones that survived, some of them were captured and put into so-called enslavement, or they were basically prisoners of war, and they were shipped off to some, corporation, and now they had to, maybe work on some rice farm or something like that. And then the other ones that survived, but they got away, they went deeper into South Georgia and the Everglades of Florida. So that's why I say that the ancestors of the Seminole Indians, a lot of them are the Red Sticks, the Red Stick Creeks, who were fighting in Georgia and Alabama. But after they had that battle with Andrew Jackson, in order for them to get their shit back together, they went deeper into Florida. And then they, mixed in with those people down there. And the result of that is who we call the Seminoles. So yes, a lot of the Seminoles, They're from Georgia and Alabama because their ancestors are red sticks. All right, those men who went into the South of Georgia, Alabama, Florida to get away from Andrew Jackson and them. Okay, and some of them went deeper into the Everglades, and they also became what they know as the American Maroons. So when you hear those terms, the Seminoles and the Maroons of Florida, their ancestors, a lot of them were the red sticks coming from Georgia and Alabama. So let's go again. Let's continue. Over 100 years prior, the Spanish crown and Moorish Americans of Florida came to treaty terms, ceasing conflict for some time. Outside of English/United States occupied territory, red stick Muslims merged into existing groups of South Georgia/Northern Florida Americans still managing to hold on. Ocmulgee, Hitchiti, and Apalachicola were some of the tribes who had been pushed south from English invasions. This new group of different tribes became known as the Seminole Confederacy. The true Confederate States of America were the autochthonous Southern landowners who wished to keep the United States out of their internal affairs. More Southerners were in a struggle to keep their nationality and land, which was Tecumseh's whole point about the Pan-American movement, or alliance rather, excuse me. It was meant to be a political movement based on indigenous American spiritual cultures that would protect its own people under its own republic. The United States wished to override autochthonous sovereignty and assimilate all free Moorish American nationals into their corporate control. So let's go through this part one more time. So it says that the Ocmulgee, the Hitchiti, and some other tribes that were in Georgia, they were pushed south from these English invasions. And all these tribes now were going together into parts of Florida. And they became what's known as the Seminole Confederacy. Now, this Seminole Confederacy, this is actually the true Confederate States of the South. And these were the owners of the land. All right. So that's why I say that the Civil War was about a lot of the Aboriginal people fighting to keep their land versus the United States. A lot of it ain't had nothing to do with no fucking Union. It wasn't no Union Caucasian people fighting against no Union Confederate people. No, the Caucasian Slavs in the South, they weren't landowners. No, even the Caucasian so-called Jewish. No, the majority of the landowners was still the Aboriginal people. But you had some of these melanated Edomites coming in, getting land, all right, through the United States. But originally, the landowners were all the tribal people indigenous to the South. So when I think of the American Civil War, I think of the Aboriginal people in the South fighting to keep their land. And they had to fight against not only some of their own people who were joining and assimilating the Europeans, but they had to also fight against some of the, invading European foreign, United States influence that really had been birthed on the 13 colonies. And they just got greedy and they started to expand west. And they went against what King George proclamated. I think it was a proclamation of 1763, if I can remember correctly. You all can look that up. But King George, I believe it's the proclamation of 1763, where he basically demanded that all his serfs, his Caucasian Slavs, that were working on the 13 colonies, that they do not go west of the Appalachian, that they do not start invading the Aboriginal tribes and their land and bothering their civilization, the civilization of the Mississippians. He was basically saying to leave them alone, because that was a lot of the business deal. It was like, hey, look now, King George, we're going to lease this land to you and you can do this, but you're going to have to make sure that your corporations and your Slavs and your workers, they got to stay in the land that we lease to you. Don't have them coming into our land. And he agreed. That's what I was saying. So these original people coming from Europa that were starting the 13 colonies, a lot of them were intermarrying into these indigenous families. And through that, they were having land deals. And then the indigenous people would lease land to the European. And that's how they created the 13 colonies. They would create corporations. We would show them how to grow certain, crops and products on the land. And then they would export that business, or those products rather, back to Europe. But what happened is that they just got greedy and they wanted more and more and more land, to where now how you see how the United States, not only do they have damn near all of mainland North America, but these folks don't went into Central America and all types of shit. But it started as just the 13 colonies, and it was not supposed to expand west. All right. So let's read this. From 1816 to 1865, Moorish Seminole Confederates were determined to eliminate as many European lives as they could. After the Creek Wars, the United States, led by Andrew Jackson, moved into Spanish West Florida, only to meet Seminoles prepared to fight. Although treaties were made with Spain, Americans did not trust them either and kept a distant relationship with them. Dirty Spain makes deals with the United States to cede northern Florida, causing more grief for the Seminole Nation. Removing Americans wouldn't be easy since they were camped out in secret locations throughout the Everglades. Humidity, mosquitoes, and unfamiliarity drained the energy of United States troops chasing Seminoles. Ferocious American alligators helped by chomping on the flesh of whites as they stalked them in the dark rivers. American Seminoles set booby traps, forcing United States soldiers to adjust to the guerrilla techniques displayed by Red Stick descendants. So what ended up happening was that after the Creek Wars ended, the United States kept putting up a lot of money and resources to try to, follow the Red Sticks and keep going deeper into Florida and parts of, the Carolinas and Georgia, and trying to basically wipe out the Red Sticks and go to war with them. And that's what you all know of as the Seminole Wars. And there were 3 Seminole Wars. All right. But the truth is that they never could actually defeat the Seminoles. All right. They did not defeat the Seminoles. OK. So let's continue. In May of 1830, Andrew Jackson signed a law that will force Americans to leave ancestral lands for relocation west of the Mississippi River. The Indian Removal Act was using elements of the Dum Diversas Papal Bull of 1452 to, quote, invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use for profit. So that's how our people, not only in the South, but in different parts of the Americas, started to lose, our land. Because when the Roman Catholic Church created those papal bulls during the Spanish Inquisition, so you know how they talk about the so-called Moors being kicked out of Europe, or they talk about the Moorish Muslims of Islam and the melanated Israelites of Europa being kicked out, not only from the Jacobite Wars, but being kicked out from the Iberian Peninsula that had been there for hundreds of years because their cousins are the indigenous Americans. The Spanish Inquisition of the so-called Moors, not only did it happen in Europe, but it came to the Americas. Yes, it came to the Americas. It came to the Americas. So those same papal bulls, the United States used those same Roman Canaanite slave laws, torture laws, and they applied them to the indigenous Americans. All right. So when they talk about the Dum Diversas of 1452, all right, where it talks about to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens. Remember we said earlier, now what is a Saracen? Now, we said that the Hebrews, or Eber, that descend through Abraham and Sarah, they are Isaac and Jacob Israel, known as the Israelites. But you also got to remember that Eber, or Hebrew, descending through Isaac, Isaac had 2 sons. He had Jacob and Esau. Okay. So when Abraham had his son Isaac, that was through Sarah. And Sarah's descendants are the Israelites. Okay. Sarah's descendants are the Israelites. All right. So usually when I hear that term Saracens, it makes me think about the melanated Shemitic people through the line of Jacob/Israel. All right. So that's basically what you have. You have the Roman Edomites that were, faking as Christians, that were really behind closed doors Satanists, and they were using the dumb diverses to not only destroy, the melanated people of Europa that they didn't want to be in competition with no more, but then they came to the Americas and they brought the same shit with them over here. All right. So the Indian Removal Act of 1830, when they kicked, or what they call the so-called Trail of Tears, when they kicked out the Aboriginal people in the South from like Georgia and Alabama from the Creek Wars, and they made them settle in so-called Oklahoma. This is why you have cities in Oklahoma called Muskogee. All right. And the people that created Black Wall Street, they were a mixture of some of the melanated people already in that land and the Aboriginal people coming from Georgia and Alabama from the Trail of Tears. And they, created what's known as Black Wall Street. So when they talk about the Trail of Tears, that happened to so-called black people, so-called black Americans in the South that were, you more than likely had a family that was associated with the Red Sticks. So when I say that there were thousands and thousands of Red Sticks, because remember, the Red Sticks weren't only the warriors, but it was their family members too. You know what I'm saying? So if you weren't really trying to get down with Roman Christian culture and, the Satanists of Edom, the Satanists of Egypt, if you weren't trying to get down with that, then, that you were going to be attacked by the Inquisitionists. All right. So as we started the tape, what's the difference between me and you? Do you come from the house of Israel, or do you come from the house of Edom? We both melanated, but are you an upper creek or are you a lower creek? Are you a red stick or are you from the Tabernacle of Edom? And only one can answer that question. So I appreciate your time with me and staying in this tape, and hopefully you listen to this from the beginning to the end. I also want to salute the brother one more time for leaving a great comment that we used as the backdrop. Stay tuned. We out.